topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to Triversity Talk. As you all know, I am your hostess with the mostest, Wendy Stuart Kaplan, and my brilliant co-host,
Simone Kraus.
Love it. Simone, a little louder. I need to hear you a little louder. Okay, perfect. Yes. We want to hear, right? Turn up the volume, as they say.
I don't talk loud enough, but I will tonight.
Okay, great. Scream it from the top of a mountain. It's so great to see you as always, Simone. How have you been lately?
I've been doing very good. It's been an exciting week for me. So
right.
I got to meet Senator Cory Booker and Representative Mikey Sherrill at a town hall held at Edge Pride, which was really great.
Oh my God, this is so great.
Yeah, I know. It was just out of the blue. I got an email asking if I could attend, and I was there. I even got to ask one question, which was really good. It had to do with transgender people on Medicaid, where 9 states don't allow that. They ban it. And Florida, what they did instead of the Florida legislature voting for it, they created their own commission for standards of affairs for trans people and banned anybody on Medicaid, which goes basically from youth and all the way up to 64 from any standards of care for transgender people. But 2 days later, at the 4th District Court, just ruled that we are covered, transgender people are covered under the American Disability Act because in the last DSM, when they got rid of gender identity disorder and it became just gender dysphoria, we are now covered under it because it's not considered a disorder. So I'm sure we will see this going to the Supreme Court.
But you know what? This is so great because once again, okay, the move was against you. And then there seems to be what's happening. And I'm going to say in the universe, some incredible loophole turns up to push back. And that's, as you know, that's what it's all about, is pushing back. I mean, that's unbelievable with the amount of people that are on Medicaid. It is terrible. But, we all like to see the sunshine on the other side. Fingers crossed that everything goes smooth and it gets put through. So what was your exact question that you asked? Do you remember?
Oh, it had to do it's a dangerous precedent that was set by Governor DeSantis, creating this commission in the state health department. And then they had 2 days of hearings and a lot of anti-trans people testifying. And in 24 hours, they basically said, we're not going to cover anybody. And then Governor DeSantis was behind it. But since it didn't go to the Florida legislature, I mean, it set a dangerous precedent that any state could do that.
But
both representatives, senator and representative, will be looking into it because Medicaid is funded half with federal money.
Right. Exactly. I got to tell you, and I always get this from you, that every day is a challenge, more so than people even realize with what is going on behind the scenes with it's very sneaky. It's very underhanded. All right. But as you're seeing, there's pushback and fingers crossed that continues to happen, Thank you for sharing that with us. I was not aware of that. And this is all the more reason, Simone, I know you're an activist and you speak on panels. All the more reason to continue doing what you're doing, right?
Oh, yeah.
What was it like? I know who Cory Booker is, and my friend Tim Moss, who's been on the show, is also worked with Cory Booker. What was it like meeting Cory Booker?
It was great. He actually took my phone. He is a real professional at doing selfies. He is the king of it. Oh yeah, everyone look up. I'll hold it up. It was great. It was probably one of the best times of my life.
Really? Okay, so when I go to your Facebook page, I'll see the selfie that you did. Oh, okay. Now I have to do that. Now I'm totally chomping at the bit to do that. Well, as you know, in Pike County, Pennsylvania, and for everybody listening, we service the tri-state area, the more rural areas, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and upstate New York. And we had a pride event called Pike County Pride because it was time to bring everybody together. We've had a lot of pushback in Pennsylvania, and we're finding there's more and more people that are on our team. And we gave a pride event and it was a tremendous success. So for people that wanted to know, why are you doing a pride event in August? And my answer to that is, well, why not? Right. And we had wonderful vendors that came to support us. We had everybody on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, which was really fabulous. I met some great new people, and we had a show, an entertaining show, and we had giveaways. So if you're listening to this, everyone can do something to make a difference, to raise awareness out there and bring community together. We now need it more than ever with those midterm elections right around the corner. They'll be here quicker than you think. Well,
involved.
Yes, get involved, phone bank, but every single person. Lots of people say they don't have time, and a lot of people don't. But you know what? Every single person can do one little thing. Even if it's one little thing, even if it's a small contribution to someone in a legislature that's doing good work, everybody can do something. And speaking of activists, I was very impressed by this person that I met during Pride. I was marching this year in New York Pride with the Imperial Court, an amazing organization that does so much philanthropic work all over the United States of America. And I met this wonderful person from Colorado who had a really great activist sign and told me that she was a czarina within the Imperial Court Council, goes by the name Bettie Page. And we started talking. And from talking to Bettie, I found out how the Imperial Court and her sisters helped Bettie find her own truth later in life. I've spoken about this with Simone a lot. I personally believe, when you transition later in life, it's just got a whole set of different challenges. And I call this segment that we're doing Sisters Helping Other Sisters, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. So I'd like you all to meet Bettie Pages. Well, good evening.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's a couple hours earlier here in Colorado, and we're at sort of the end of our workday. And so you're catching me before my weekly poker game.
Oh, well, oh my God, I'm honored that you were able to squeeze us in before your poker game. And I have to say, it may be the end of your workday, but you're looking fresh as a daisy and loaded with energy. And you're in a warehouse.
Yeah, I own a company called Mile High Comics. We're the largest comic book retailers in the world. We own about 15 million comics and trade paperbacks and pop culture toys. And this building that we're in is my little fortress. It's the size of a Walmart, and it has 30-foot high ceilings. And, it's a great place to hide out from the Proud Boys. Because when we do our all ages drag shows in here, we've actually had them show up and, they threatened to kill me and burn the building down and things like that. So.
Oh, I mean, you are completely blowing me away. Okay. First of all, the beauty of doing this show, I meet people and I book people on the show purely by instinct. And I met you. You had, what did your activist sign say?
Oh, I can't remember. It was one of my trans signs, which basically said that trans transgender people deserve equal rights.
Right.
But I've actually been driving around the country with a gigantic sign plastered to the back of my cargo van, driving through states like Indiana and Missouri, that say transgender, or we support transgender children and their parents. And I've been just going into, I just went to Texas with that sign, drove through Dallas. I go where the bitches live, and I make sure that they understand that we're not reticent and we're not laying back, and that we're going to be fierce, and that we're going to stand up for our children, and we're going to stand up for their parents. And, this entails some measure of physical risk, because the people that are coming out of the woodwork now are horrid. And I basically get attacked online at least once a day through my company, through my commercial mechanism. And, I don't really give a rat's ass. I'm out there, and my job is to be proactive for those who have no power. And I have personal power. I'm a multimillionaire. I have vast amounts of assets, and I'm at the stage in my life. I'm almost 68 now, and I just don't give a damn anymore.
Right.
I'm going to be out there, and I'm going to be proactive, and that's why I march in things like the New York Pride Parade, even though there was a Denver parade on the same weekend.
Thank you for coming with us. Thank you.
Oh, it was an honor to march with the New York Imperial Court. They are some of the most proactive and nicest people in the entire court system.
Yeah, they're wonderful people, and they do incredible work. But I think what is impressing me so much about you is the level of risk. I mean, you can, in your own words, right? You don't give a rat's ass. I get that. By the way, you had me and Simone at that. We love that phraseology. But there is a level of personal risk, like the whole bumper sticker on the car thing. I'm imagining this, right? Simone, going through Texas, some of these people are crazy.
These aren't bumper stickers, by the way. They're 3-foot by 2-foot signs, full color with trans flag behind them. I don't screw around. Okay. No, I don't want anybody to get the misimpression that maybe I'm anything less than bold.
And has anyone ever threatened you while you were doing this?
I had a pickup try and run me off the road. They do a thing called rolling coal, where they have diesel pickups that can put out an inordinate amount of smoke if they press the right button. And I had a guy in northern Iowa try to take me out, but that's okay. I've been knifed before. I've been out there beaten. I don't care. This is something that we need to do. And, they think they're the only ones that can rage, the only ones that can be fierce, the only ones that can be active and out there. They haven't run into me yet. Okay.
No, Betty, you are fierce. I mean, you are fierce. And the fact that you are willing to take personal risk, for me personally, I do think of things like they're crazy, they have guns. What if they burn my house down? I do think of those things. But something about you're going to stand up for what you believe in no matter what.
Well, is there any other reason to live? Is there any other reason to get up in the morning? I mean, we're past, once you start talking to trans elders, okay, which is the category that I am now in demographically, whether I wanted to be in this or not, this is something that I have realized is my truth, and that I embrace. And I didn't volunteer for this. Okay, this is something that the enemy, the people that would misconstrue us, that's something that they constantly bring up, and that is the biggest crock of horse. It's something that's in your brain that is your wiring, and it's the way that you are. And I was trying to deny that for about 5-6 years after it first started being a part of me. And then I realized that this was wrong. And you alluded earlier to the fact that I mentioned that some of my sisters in the court system, and specifically on the International Court Council, they kind of staged an intervention without telling me. They asked me if I wanted to go to dinner with them one night. And then they started explaining the trans spectrum to me. And they said, girl, you're not going to fully transition. That is not who you are. But on the other hand, you are not all male, and you're in the gender fluid, non-binary, living sort of on the end of the spectrum thing. And the sooner you wise up to that and embrace it, the sooner that you become comfortable in your own skin. And it still took a while. It still took a lot of thought and reflection. And, is this really me? But once I came to that realization, that was the end of it. Because I have, since I was a small child, when I was beaten almost every day, as I've gotten older, I just don't take crap from anybody.
Of course.
And, I wasn't going to take crap from them about being a comic book dealer back in the days when it was, considered socially demeaning.
But I know people that have done that, but I'm so impressed because you're the comic book dealer. I mean, I'm running through my head the people I know that do comic books, especially in New York. It's a specialty, right? But you come from a background now, you're telling us you were abused as a kid. So horrible, beaten every day. How did you become such a successful person? What is it within you that moved past all of that?
Well, I started dealing comics when I was 13, 14 years old. And I do mean by dealing, I mean, I went out into public and I was selling at antique fairs by myself.
Wow.
And the reason why I did that was because my mom suffered from really serious PTSD from having been bombed in Germany during World War II. And she was mentally very unstable. My stepfather was incredibly abusive and 26 years her senior. And so he hated me. And now, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that one of the things that he really hated about me, he was a former drill sergeant in the Army, and he really valued toxic masculinity. And I could not, even as a small child, buy into that. And so when other kids beat me up and I came home, he would beat me again for having been beaten by the kids, which accomplished absolutely nothing because
there was an attitude. There was an attitude of parents that did that. You're right. You called it toxic masculinity, but it was also in those days, right? Very much part of that male culture. Simone, did you experience anything like that?
Well, that time frame of period, I mean, you had all the veterans that were from World War II, and they were really pretty much coming of age, and their children were getting older. The women's right movement, exploded, and so which really threatened the male ego. So the toxic masculinity, and as they got older, they didn't have the tools to really deal with it. They went through the war. A lot of them had PTSD. I mean, it was a change in era in it, and the toxic masculinity really came out in full force. My father wasn't like that, but I've seen other friends who had their fathers that weren't like that.
I've heard the expression "man up." We've all heard that. When are you gonna man up? But obviously, none of these things affected you. And I'm linking this into the fact that you were selling comic books at antique fairs at 15. That very much shows a very solid, confident person. Not, you didn't need to quote unquote man up. You were already at 15 with an abusive background, who and what you were. And you went out there and could do that. That is unbelievably impressive. The self of you overrode the toxicity of your stepdad, and that's you.
It was my only way to survive because I had no siblings. I was in America by myself. My mother was mentally ill. My stepfather hated me and beat me. So I was in social isolation at that point. But what made it really weird, and this was part of my difficulties with my stepfather, was that I could never buy into the things like, for example, being abusive to women or demeaning to women or treating women as objects. I always found that just weird. It's like I could not understand how you could demean someone because of their gender. it didn't fit in the way that my brain worked. So I went out and I sold comics because in comics I found a world that was way more accepting of me and that rewarded my skills. But I was desperately poor. I ended up later on living in a car for 4 months. I slept under bridges. I slept in a homeless shelter. I did everything that I possibly could in order to generate working capital so that I could I opened my first store when I was 19 years old with $800. And I had,
wow. How was that? So what was the turnaround? So I'm assuming in your teen years, right? You had nothing. No, there was no support.
Nothing.
Were you in school?
Yeah, I had been talked by my parents into accepting a scholarship to be an Army officer via the ROTC program. And they paid me for the first 2 years. And I loved a lot of aspects of it. Like, for example, I was the most courageous one in my entire company of 300 weekend warriors as regards like jumping off rappelling towers and things like that. Absolutely no fear of that. But when they started talking to me about jumping out of airplanes and then killing people, I said, why? And that was just not the right answer. You could not be in the military and ask why. So I dropped out of that program and instead lived in a car because I would rather live in a car and be free and not have to worry about having to be committed into murdering people with whom I had no complaint, than following through on that particular obligation. So, I mean, the good news, and I'm fast forwarding a lot here. The good news is that since then I've been very, very successful, and I've sold $250 million in comic books to about 100,000 people in every country of the world, and I'm one of the most foremost people in my field. Have my own Wikipedia page for what it's worth.
Get out. From a kid that was living in a car, somewhere along the way, $800 materialized that you knew what to do with. That's also very impressive. That was your startup money. Am I correct?
Correct.
Wow.
The thing that really jumps out at me is the word that I think of when you're telling your story: resourceful.
Yes.
And I think a lot of trans people that do move ahead with their transition are resourceful to how we deal with our dysphoria. And that word just really jumped out at me, resourceful. But the way men would treat women, because I came from a blue collar trade, I worked in construction, and they were the same way. And I'm like, how can you do this? You know?
Yeah,
which
I think can't do it. It's just too weird. Why would you demean someone because they're not the same gender as you? I couldn't comprehend that. But see, that kept me out of the locker rooms, that kept me out of organized sports, that kept me out of all these kind of male dominated social structures. And so I was even more isolated as a adolescent. And comics were, people ask me if comics were an escape for me. And I think they talk about in terms of an escape from reality. And the truth is, yes, they were escape, but they were a financial escape. It was the only way that I could find to get myself on my own feet and being able to support myself. And it was really, really hard. But once I started becoming successful, I started doing shows when I was 14. I did my first national show when I was 17, opened my first store when I was 19. I owned 4 retail outlets when I was 21 years of age. And I just refused to let anything stop me. And I was willing to take extraordinary risks because there were no alternatives. There was no fallback. I had no pension plan. I had no support network. I had no one who was going to bail me out. So screw that. Let's just go balls to the wall and just do this. And we're going to do it our way. And heaven help anybody who gets in our way.
But it's the fact that you could do balls to the wall. Okay. It's the fact that you could do that. Lord knows you were hit with every single challenge. I mean, you're right. Isolated, no financial support, no family support, no siblings, no friends even, I think, right?
No. I had a couple of customers who became my friends who were still my friends. But that's how my social interaction or my social world worked.
Wow. Wow. You have such an incredible story. Now, at this point in your life, you 4 stores by the time you're 21. Did you was there any part of you that felt that you were somewhere on the spectrum of transgender? Maybe you didn't call it that, but I'm looking to explore like what you were feeling and thinking at that time.
Oh yeah, when I was in my teens, I was definitely bisexual, and I was gender ambivalent in those days. But then I eventually met the woman that became my wife. And so at that point, I kind of had to make a choice. I had to actually say, okay, I'm sitting here and I've had this ambivalence, but either I commit to this relationship and to having children, or I don't. And I'm a big believer in commitment and truth, and trying to be honorable at all times. And so I got married. I had 4 daughters. I love them to death. And everything was rolling along fairly well, except for a couple of things. And one of them is that in the course of pulling myself up by my bootstraps, my fierceness oftentimes kind of morphed into avarice. And so I became kind of fixated on making money for money's sake. And it all became like a pinball game where I was keeping score. That was one thing. And I really didn't feel terribly comfortable with that, because it also then colored my relationships with other people, where I was way more of a user and less of a cooperator. And I sort of bought into the whole corporate entrepreneur, and I always tried to tell people that I was selling comics because it was a way of being really, really capitalistic and aggressive without actually selling anything that meant anything to anybody. Because my friend Ron Turner, who runs a publishing company in San Francisco, coined the phrase that comic books were mind candy for the masses. And that's kind of what we were selling. We were selling entertainment. We were selling fun. And so, you buy them low, you sell them high, you do it quickly. And if you run over a few people in the process,
what the hey?
That's collateral damage.
Right.
But, and then this is the important part, and this is the Bettie origin story. Okay, we're getting to this.
We're getting to Bettie. Okay.
Yeah. And then I got bit in the ass by a mosquito while I was in bed. Okay, this doesn't sound noteworthy or consequential, but this particular mosquito was infected with West Nile virus.
Get out.
And so, I'm lying in bed thinking I should just swat this mosquito, and then I'm thinking I'll wake up my wife, so just let it go. So it bites me in the ass. 10 days later, I'm at Santa Clara Pueblo down in north of Santa Fe, which is one of the 19 surviving pueblos that existed during the Anasazi times. And all of a sudden, I start having serious hallucinations. And I had to leave and drive myself 400 miles home. And
hallucinating. You drove yourself 400 miles home, hallucinating
really badly. Yeah.
I don't even know anyone that's had West Nile. I do know all about it. Of course, it's been in the news, but the irony that would happen to you is just unbelievable. So you had to drive yourself home, and then what happened?
Well, I was so sick on the way home that I actually had to get a guy at a convenience store to come out and put gas in my car because I had forgotten how. And so I got up. I finally managed to get myself to the emergency room at Boulder Community Hospital. And it took him no time at all to say, hey, guess what? You got West Nile. This is so classic of symptoms, and you're about to go down for a few weeks, couple months.
Really?
And good luck. Bye. There's no treatment. Oh, and by the way, when we did that little CAT scan of your brain, we noticed that a big hunk of your left temporal lobe is missing. How'd that happen?
Wow.
It's like, what the hell are you talking about? So, here I am. I'm 48 years old, and I suddenly find out that a big hunk of the left side of my brain is not there. I have what's called an arachnoid cyst, which is what fills in the hole when a part of your brain doesn't develop.
Is this something that someone is born with? Again, this is a genetic anomaly, right?
Yeah. And it turns out, I found out later on, I have my father, who abandoned me when I was a 6 months old, had some other kids. So they're half siblings of mine. And one of my half siblings actually died from this same condition, because an arachnoid cyst is like glass. They're very, very rigid, and they can shatter. And when they shatter, if they shatter, then it pierces your brain, and it's like the equivalent of having a massive stroke, and you die. So I walk around every day with kind of a sword of Damocles in my brain. If someone punches me in the head, I'll die. That's just the end of that. But I did not know this until I got West Nile. So anyway, I had West Nile, and at that particular moment, 2003, Northern Colorado had a huge outbreak, the biggest in the nation. And we had 6,000 people that got it, that they tested. They stopped testing after a while because they didn't want to run their numbers up. But 6,000 people that they tested that came out positive. About 70 of those people died. And then I was in a West Nile support group where a lot of other people had paralysis, some of which mitigated over time, some of which did not. A lot of people got really, really ill with things like what we call long COVID now, where they had piercing headaches. And that's what hit me. I had long West Nile for about 3 years, where I had severe cognitive impairment from 2003 through 2006. And
that's a long time. My gosh.
Oh, we're not there yet. So from 2003 to 2006, I basically had nonstop swelling in my brain, which caused periodic migraines that were so bad that I would go fetal for 30 hours at a time. And I couldn't even move, couldn't open my eyes. And the doctors just said, gee, that's a shame. That was the extent of the help. And, it's not like COVID. I mean, COVID today, everybody's doing all this research and trying to figure out what the hell they can do for all these sufferers. When it was just me, nobody gave a shit. I mean, I'm sorry, but they just didn't. I could just curl up and die, and they didn't care. There was no money in me. Okay, so you talk about having to learn to fend for yourself. That's what I had to do. But what happened was in 2007, on exactly the same day at Santa Clara Pueblo, I had a second major meltdown. And this one, I had been talking to the doctors for about 30 days prior to that, telling them, I feel like this is coming right back on again, totally full blown. And they said, no, can't happen. And then I had this meltdown at Santa Clara Pueblo during the sacred dances, again, August 12th, because it's their annual big celebratory day. And I drove myself home again.
This is unbelievable. Wow.
And this time they put me in the hospital and actually tried to figure out what was wrong with me. And they eventually came up with the realization that I had encephalitis. And I had encephalitis for 4 years.
The entire time.
Wow. And the hypothalamus is the oldest and most primitive part of our brain. It's what connects our brain to our spinal column. And the hypothalamus is also what determines our gender and to some extent our sexuality. But really, our gender perception forms in the hypothalamus about 6-7 months in. And, as most people who have seen all the right to life pictures and videos.
So 7 months when I didn't know about the hypothalamus. Okay. So it's 7 months. The gender is determined in hypothalamus.
Yeah, but that's long after your genitalia have formed.
Oh,
so when
Lord, right.
So what you have is you have a zygote. Okay, you've got this fetus that is beginning to develop, and everybody who's seen an ultrasound has seen, oh my God, it's a boy. Oh my God, it's a girl. Well, they say boy, girl, but what they don't realize is that that's only on the basis of physical attribution. It's not on the basis of mental perception. Right. And one of the main origins of trans is when there's a disconnect during that period between when genitalia form and when the actual self-perception of gender is formed. And this was something that it was a huge article in the New York Times that went into this in enormous depth. And I am not a medical professional, so I don't even pretend to know this stuff.
Betty, what year was this article in the New York
It
Times?
was about 3 years ago.
Right. And it was in the New York Times. And where else? You know what I'm saying? It's like, this is huge, what you're talking about. And I've just known, and I learned a lot from Simone. We do know that what develops, biologically on a person's body cannot sometimes match up with, how they feel in gender. But what you're saying is there is an actual location, right? The hypothalamus at 7 months is the actual location determining what the gender is. So the junk in the trunk that anyone is born with is really kind of meaningless because things aren't matching up.
Well, also there can be a disconnect that's created while you're still in the womb, because any number of things can occur between A and B that can then alter there's no matchup then. And I would, Simone, you were trying to put in something here. I think you got something on this that probably is more informed than mine.
Well, I do know, because when they were using the artificial estrogen back in the 50s and 60s into the early 70s, what happened is that if a woman miscarried, the next pregnancy, they would give this massive doses of estrogen at a certain time frame. And that was the time frame that they now find out is when the gender identity comes about.
Yeah.
And so they don't know if it's other genetic links or whatnot, but there are studies that came out, the University of Georgia, February 5th, 2020, that talk about you're born with either a male or a female brain. When this happens at that time frame, and your body,
absolutely,
you get washed with androgens, you get washed with estrogens. It's like, okay, well, my brain was, I was a Friday afternoon and, formed baby. They wanted to go home. The angel wanted to get off the line right away. It's like, come on, hurry up. Let's run out of here, But and there's been a lot of study on it now. And that's what they've really come across is that, you're born with a male or a female brain, or varying degrees of
it as well. Well, I have a question for both of you then, now that you're making me think. All of these fertility treatments, have there been any, right, where they pump you, the female is pumped with estrogen, to get everything so that they have the embryo stick that time, right? So that being said, how has anyone done a study on that? How many children are born that are trans from fertility? Is there a study?
Not that I know of.
Geez, we got to get a doctor on this show. Now, I'm not going to let this one rest because...
No, it's too fascinating. Yeah.
Right. Well, no, it explains, okay, because we all need to be able, I believe, to scientifically, when we have to push back, because Betty and Simone knows this too, like in rural areas in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and we read it on Facebook all the time. There's only, as far as I'm concerned, there's only two sexes, male and female. There is no, and it's just a complete lie, as we know. But
and what I come back with right away is that 1 out of every 80,000 assigned female births, at birth, is actually, they have an XY chromosome, and it doesn't become apparent because all of a sudden, when they become of age, when they should have a puberty, they don't. They do some testing, then they do a genetic testing. It's like, oh, by the way, your daughter has XY chromosome.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if that's going to happen, 1 out of 80,000, 1% of the population can have what.
So you're saying 1 out of 80,000. Here's what I'm saying from practical experience, and you too, Simone. There are an awful lot of trans kids, children, young children, and Simone will back me up on this, all right? This is not a case of a kid going through a phase. I know some of these kids, all right? It's not a phase. So why is this all happening now? What is making this happen now? Yeah, Simone.
Okay, I'm just going to put right in on that.
Yeah.
Okay, we just came out with a long-term study. They followed transgender adolescents for 5 years, and they found out once they come out as trans and they identify, 97.5% of them don't change their mind. There's a few, 2 or 3% that detransition, but then go back, and a couple that because it's just too hard, or the family. But basically, it's 97.5%. Child comes out as trans, they are. They also just came out with another study that they were talking about so many young girls, female, identifying as male, whether it was a social construct, and they're finding out now that it's not. They're not influenced.
Oh, right.
I think I'm going to go right back. Years ago in the 50s, no, they didn't want anyone to be left-handed. And they smack your hand or whatnot, and then eventually they stopped doing that. And 12% of the population is left-handed. I think if they do not start beating down on the trans community and just let this naturally happen, I think about 1.7% of the country will be transgender, and it'll just level out there, and then it will go up higher. But right now, we're not allowing it, and we're doing studies.
No, right. But at least, you know what? I always will find the upside to it. At least studies are being done. Betty, I want to hop back to this because, I could talk for hours as Simone could.
I could too.
So one of the things that you told me was, the court council, of course, helped you find your truth and find where you were in the spectrum. But prior to that, you started to do drag. Now, I want to paint this scenario. You were married, you had a wife, you had 4 daughters. When did you start doing drag?
Well, I was, my company, remember earlier I said I got sick for 3 years?
Yes.
Well, I was sick from 2003 to 2006. I was better for most of 2007 until August 12th. And then I went down for another 3 years.
I can't believe what a story.
And so I had 6 years where I could barely read anymore. I definitely could not read maps. I couldn't do numbers in my head. Try being a business person, an entrepreneur, if you can't do calculations, percentages in your head. It was a nightmare. I was at a show down in Florida where some friends of mine lived, and I ran into this young lesbian girl by the name of Ashley Mbezi, and just kind of spur of the moment, I said, hey, would you be willing to drive around with me and basically be my seeing eye lesbian? And she agreed. And, so all of a sudden you got this really cranky pants, old brain dead comic book dealer and this young, vivacious, smart as hell little lesbian girl. And we're out and we're a team. And we start driving all over the country. And, she liked chasing tail a lot. She took me to gay bars. I had never been in a gay bar in my life. Are you kidding? And so, of course, she takes me into Bunkhouse out on Long Island, which is one of the
Bunkhouse. My God, my PR person used to be the person that owned it, Eileen Shapiro. I know.
Well, that was a very well-worn gay bar. Let me just say, I've been in a lot of gay bars since then, and on the skeezy spectrum, the Bunkhouse was at least towards the end of its days, was definitely had bathrooms you didn't want to go in, but it was an interesting place to start, and I met my first drag queens there, and this was the really strange thing. A lot of things had changed for me at the time that I met Ashley. I decided, for example, that I no longer wanted anything to do with death. So I stopped eating any kind of animal flesh whatsoever. I couldn't handle it. It was something that it wasn't philosophical. It was visceral. It was something where, when I was sick the second time, they had to do a spinal tap on me, and I checked out and they had to bring me back. And I find that as being a transitional point in and of itself, because all of a sudden money didn't mean anything to me anymore. I didn't want to have anything to do with death. I really didn't want to, per se. I didn't even want to continue with my business in the way that I had done it before. I was determined that I would no longer be that avaricious a-hole that was out there trying to conquer the world. I didn't care anymore. And so everything was changing for me at that moment in time. And then I saw boys in dresses and I said, oh my God, she's cute. And I love those shoes. Bitch, where did you get those? And it's like, why am I saying these things? Where did this come from? And I could not understand. Okay, Simone, everybody else, okay, I really feel kind of cheated here. I got to tell you, okay,
Wow.
because, all the 8-year-olds that come out and say, well, I'm not a boy. I didn't get any of that. That was like the furthest thing from my damn mind. I would occasionally think that a boy was cute. And gee, I'd kind of like to be with him. But that's a whole different thing from, I'm not who I was before. And so I had to start interacting with queens. I had my first crush on a drag queen, Kelly Torelli, up at the drugstore in Montreal, cute as a bug. Things got really weird. And yeah, my wife started getting a little weirded out when she saw these drag queen photos on my phone.
I was going to ask about that. I don't know how old your kids were at that time, but now you have this realization, or as I call an epiphany. How is that affecting your family?
It's been okay. I think that all of them would prefer that I didn't have this epiphany, and they're all having to greater or lesser extents, try to rationalize who and what I am. And basically, this whole thing that I come up with of honey, it's brain damage. There's nothing I can do. That's very convenient. And so, thank God for the New York Times. Anyway, it helps me a lot, but it really is true that I had zero interest in being a part of the drag community. Had never been in a gay bar, had never seen a drag show. I take it back. I was at Raymond's in London watching a burlesque show, and they had a drag queen that was impersonating one of the burlesque dancers. That was the extent of it. Then all of a sudden, I'm like completely
immersed,
enthralled.
Yeah.
And little by little, I got involved with the Imperial Court in Denver. And I was doing that, and I had a straight woman who was my partner in introducing me to the Imperial Court in Denver. And she and I went around for about 6 years together. And she actually taught me all about drag. She had been the protege of a really noted Denver drag queen, and knew what all the nomenclature was, knew what all the etiquette, what all the unwritten rules were. And she did a great deal to school me. The only trouble is that she was a raging bitch. And so that did kind of cause a lot of consternation. And also, and this is really important, she did not want me to be a queen. She wanted me to be a straight guy and be her escort and her purse holder so that she could be the queen. And there can only be one queen in
there.
There
can only be one queen, Betty. I was
that was just it. So inevitably there was a disconnect that created, and so I went out on my own. And this is where someone that you know very well actually was the one who was the catalyst. Now, I was already on the Imperial Court Council when I was in Salt Lake City, and I had breakfast with Coco Lachine.
Oh, I love Coco.
Coco Lachine is the Queen Mother of New York, and a really good friend of mine, and I love her to death. And she needed a ride to the airport early in the morning, and I was the only sucker willing to get up that damn early. And so we had
Coco anything.
Yeah, for Coco, yeah. But anyway, we had breakfast in the hotel, and she turned to me and she said, "Is the day ever going to come when you actually start living your truth?"
Wow, that's like right between the eyes.
Yeah, it really was. And it was like, well, but I'm still hanging out with this straight girl, and she hates me in dresses, and lobbity. Well, anyway, that basically was the moment. That was the moment when I said, I have to rethink this all. I have to rethink who I am. I have to rethink who I'm going to be. Now, let me interject the money part of all of this. Oh, because this is super important. I mean, right here behind me, I got all these comic books in boxes. But what those comic books represent is opportunity, because I have about 100,000 customers that buy from me on a fairly regular basis. Not all of them at the same time. I mean, we're talking about spread out. But within any giant population like that, you're going to have a percentage of homophobes. And you're definitely going to have a percentage of people that are transphobic. And one of the things that I'd had to be very careful of, even to the extent of wearing masks sometimes, was that when I went out in drag, I didn't let any photographs occur because I thought that some people would blackmail me and threaten to expose me in the straight world. And what I had to finally resolve was that I was done with that and that I was going to come out, and there's no halfway. Okay, when you're running an international business, you cannot say, oh, and by the way, I put on frocks now and then. No,
Right.
that doesn't work. Either you explain, I'm doing this because I'm on the trans spectrum and I'm gender fluid, and Betty is a part of my heart, and I refuse to let her go. And if you can't deal with that, if you find the fact that I'm a duality rather than a mono, move on. Move on.
Wow.
I'm done with you.
We are at the end of our 50 minutes, and I can't think of a better way to wrap this up. And I also want to talk really quick and just say, you are such an incredible role model, and choosing your truth, living your truth. You have your business, you have your life, you are living what you believe in. My gosh, Bettie Pages, what more could any of us want in the world than what you're doing right now?
Well, we can hope, and what we want is a better world for our children. And the children of our community deserve better than what they're getting right now. And I will fight for them till my dying breath.
You are a force. I get to take one picture before we have to say goodbye, everyone. Cheese. Betty, you and I will be in touch, of course, again. Simone, I talk to all the time. Thank you from really the bottom of my heart. You blew me away so many times tonight. Simone, thank you you're always such a tremendous co-host filled with such knowledge. Thank you to our audience who tuned in. We will see you all next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Simone. It was nice to meet you.
Pleasure.